I'm not a calendar person. A lot of my friends and family are calendar people, and it seems to serve them really well. But for whatever reason, the habit just doesn't seem to stick for me. But the other day, I was listening to a podcast with a guy on named James Clear, who's the author of the New York Times #1 best-selling book, Atomic Habits. In the podcast, he said a quote that really stuck with me.
Every action you take is like a vote for the type of person that you want to become.
This line really got me thinking because I'm a very goal-oriented person and I have a lot of ideas about who I want to be and what I want to represent. But because I'm not a calendar person, I don't really have a way of knowing if I'm living my daily life in a way that's voting for the same type of person I have in my head. So, in an effort to figure out who I am and maybe become a little more productive in the process, I set out to track every minute of my life for 30 days. Now for the ground rules. First, the purpose of time tracking isn't to pre-plan every minute of your day. I wanted my time tracking to be as authentic as possible so that the results would actually represent how I would spend my time even if I wasn't tracking every minute of my life. Second, because I was using a tool called Google Calendar, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, the program made me round to the nearest 15-minute mark. In hindsight, this is probably a good thing because otherwise I would have had to add updated my calendar for 3 minutes into my calendar while I was updating my calendar, which is a little too meta for me. Finally, rule number 3, don't miss a day. And I'm happy to say, being on the other side of it, that I didn't. I started time tracking on a Monday, and by the Wednesday, I'd already realized something kind of interesting. Even though I didn't have any specific goals about how much time I wanted to spend on my phone or watching sports, go KO. Simply knowing I was going to have to write it down in my calendar was extremely motivating. It turns out humans are surprisingly decent at keeping ourselves accountable if we have a system in place that helps us track our progress. It's the same reason why a lot of people love making checklists or tracking their receipts. Knowing this, if you really needed to be productive for a short period of time like 1 week, I would highly recommend time tracking. I found that time tracking didn't remove my time wasters entirely, but it did regulate how much time I spent on them. Normally, after about a half hour to an hour, I would start thinking to myself, there's probably better ways I could be using my time right now, and that would make me get onto something better. Another thing I learned through this experience is that work output isn't the only valuable use of time. I realized that writing down the time I spent with friends and family never really bothered me. I actually began to realize that the time I spent on my phone, or maybe even working, should have probably been used instead towards exercise. I've never had a specific exercise schedule because in high school I naturally lived a very active lifestyle. However, through this experiment, I realized that the time I used to spend playing sports in high school never got fully replaced with anything else in university. An entrepreneur named Jaspreet Singh believes that there are 4 different aspects of health that humans need to manage in order to live their best life.
If you want to live a happy and fulfilled life, you have to be healthy in these 4 aspects. First, you have to be physically fit. Second, you have to be mentally fit. Third, you have to be spiritually fit. And fourth is financially fit.
I would say that spending time can generally be deemed valuable if it's spent working towards one of these 4 goals. By the end of week 2, I realized that time tracking is not something I would want to pursue long term. I found it motivating at first, but over time I found the feeling of guilt every time I wasn't spending my time doing something useful started to become pretty tiring and demoralizing. I think it's great to try and cut down your leisure time to get more value out of your day, but I don't think a goal of 0 leisure time is any good either. The fact is, our lives are short, and a lot of the work that seems really important now probably doesn't matter over the span of 20 or 30 years. So if our goal is to live our best life, we need to ask ourselves what uses of time will help us work toward living that best life. I don't think scrolling through social media is going to help my life very much, but watching a hockey game at the end of the day once in a while probably isn't going to hurt it too much. Okay, now let's take a peek at what my results were. So I divided my uses of time into 6 main categories. First category I called YouTube work, which is just time spent on my YouTube channel. The second category I called career goals. I'm currently in my 2nd year of university, so this includes everything from going to classes, studying at home, taking exams, working on resumes, applying to jobs, and volunteering. My third category I called physical and social health. So this includes everything from eating meals and getting exercise, but also the time I spend with friends and family. The next category is called leisure, and this is pretty much time I spent not doing useful things toward those 4 categories that we talked about. This includes, going to social media, watching the NHL, which I watch way too much of, and anything else that I deemed not overly valuable. The 5th category is sleep, because obviously it takes up a big chunk of the day, so I wanted to see whether or not I was getting a decent amount of sleep. And the final category that I actually added after day 1 because I realized I was spending a lot of time commuting. So I wanted to see how big a chunk that ended up taking of my day. So at the end of the month, this is how it divided out. The biggest category was sleep, and I was pretty happy with this because it equaled out to about a third of my day, which if you do the math rides out to about 8 hours a day, which sounds great to me. The second biggest category was actually leisure, which I was pretty surprised about, because I felt like I had a pretty productive month. But I guess what I learned, and what I realized a lot of people probably struggle with without realizing, is the fact that even if your leisure times are short, they add up really fast. The vast majority of my leisure times were only a half hour to an hour long at most, but the fact is, I guess they happen a lot more than you realize as they're happening, and once you start tracking them, you realize that they eat up a pretty big chunk of your day. The next biggest category was social and physical health, which adds up to about 19% of my day, followed by career goals at 12%. And finally, we have YouTube work at just 8% of my day, and commuting at 6%. Now that 6% may seem small at first, but after doing the math, I realized that means I just drove shy of 47 hours over the course of the month. That is crazy. I believe I mentioned this in a previous video, but actually partway through this experiment, I started using my time driving for different things like brainstorming and listening to business podcasts, because I felt like I needed to get back at least some of that time that I was losing. The final takeaway that I noticed is that if you add up my YouTube work time and my career goal time, it actually turns out that the time I spend at work, my social and physical health time, and my leisure time are all fairly even. Now, I don't know if this is good or bad. I'm sure it depends on the person and their situation, but it seems to indicate that my life is fairly balanced, I think. Although I would really like to get that amount of leisure time just slightly below the other two. I think that would be ideal, so maybe down the road, I'll try this experiment again one day. So if you haven't given time tracking a try, please go do it and let me know what your results are down below. Be sure to subscribe. I'm trying to get more subscribers. Right now I have 10. I would love an 11th. And finally, last but not least, go do good things.